He bought her at an auction, but what he gave her was freedom. The morning air felt heavy as people gathered near the old wooden barn at the edge of town. The place had seen many auctions before: cattle, farm tools, land contracts, and sometimes items from families who had fallen into hard times. Today was no different on the surface. Yet something about the crowd felt uneasy, as if everyone sensed that this auction would be remembered for reasons no one wanted to speak about openly. Men stood in small groups, talking quietly while pretending not to stare at the center platform. Women lingered near the edges, whispering behind gloved hands. Dust moved slowly across the ground with each step, and a low hum of conversation mixed with the restless sound of animals tied nearby. At the far end of the platform stood a young woman. She held her back straight even though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Her clothes were simple and clean but worn from long use. Her eyes moved across the crowd, not searching for sympathy but watching carefully, measuring every face as if trying to understand what would happen next. Most people avoided meeting her gaze. Some looked down. Others pretended to focus on auction papers or livestock nearby. A few stared openly, curiosity stronger than discomfort. The auctioneer cleared his throat and adjusted his hat. He was a man used to difficult sales, but even he seemed unsure how to begin. He shuffled through papers, delaying the moment just long enough for the tension to grow. "This next item," he said slowly, "comes from a legal arrangement tied to unpaid debts and labor agreements." His words sounded official, but they did little to ease the quiet tension spreading through the crowd. The woman did not move. She had heard the explanation many times before, in offices, courtrooms, and whispered conversations that felt colder than any winter wind. Each time the words were repeated, they felt less real, as if she were watching someone else's story unfold. People knew parts of her history. Her family had once owned land on the edge of town. A sudden illness took her parents within months of each other. Without strong connections or wealth, she had struggled to maintain the property. Legal papers, contracts she barely understood, and debts she never expected slowly closed around her like a tightening rope. Now she stood here because of choices made by others, long before she had the power to change anything. The auctioneer began the bidding at a low number. His voice carried across the open space, but no one answered. A long silence followed. A man near the front shifted uncomfortably. Another shook his head slightly, refusing to make eye contact. Some people came only to watch, not to participate. Others feared the responsibility or the judgment that might follow if they placed a bid. The young woman felt each second stretch endlessly. She had promised herself she would not beg, no matter what happened. Her dignity was the last thing she still controlled.
"Any offers?" the auctioneer asked again, louder this time.
Still nothing. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Someone whispered that this arrangement was too complicated. Another said it would bring trouble. A few shook their heads as if the entire situation made them uncomfortable. Then, from the back of the gathering, boots sounded against the wooden boards. A tall man stepped forward slowly. His coat carried dust from travel, and his hat shadowed most of his face. People turned toward him immediately. Many recognized him, a rancher who lived outside town, known for keeping to himself. He rarely attended public events. When he did, he spoke little. The auctioneer paused, relieved that someone might finally break the silence. The rancher stood quietly, studying the papers in the auctioneer's hand before lifting his gaze toward the woman. His expression remained calm, unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met. She expected judgment or curiosity. Instead, she saw something steady, almost gentle, though he said nothing. "I'll start," he said simply, naming an amount that caused a ripple of whispers. It was not a high offer, but it was enough to move the process forward. The auctioneer repeated the bid loudly, looking around for others willing to respond. A few men exchanged glances but remained silent. One man raised a hand slightly, then lowered it again, shaking his head. The rancher did not look around. He stood as still as a fence post, waiting without pressure or pride. "Any higher bids?" the auctioneer called. Silence answered him. The woman felt her heartbeat echo in her ears. She had imagined many possible outcomes, yet none felt real until now. She did not know this man. She did not know what kind of life waited beyond this moment. "Going once," the auctioneer said. Dust swirled across the floor. "Going twice." A child laughed somewhere outside the barn, the sound strangely out of place. "Sold." The hammer struck the wooden block with a sharp crack that seemed louder than thunder. The rancher stepped forward to complete the paperwork. His movements were calm and efficient, as if he were purchasing supplies rather than taking responsibility for another person's future. The woman watched closely, searching for signs of impatience or control. She found none. When he finished signing, he turned toward her and spoke softly. "You ready?" It sounded less like an order and more like a choice. She nodded slowly, unsure what else to do. As they walked away from the platform together, whispers followed them. Some voices carried curiosity, others doubt, and a few quiet approval. The woman kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the crowd see her uncertainty. Outside, the sky stretched wide and clear. The rancher's horse waited patiently near a wagon loaded with supplies. He did not rush her. He adjusted the straps on the wagon and handed her a canteen of water without speaking. She hesitated before accepting it, unsure whether kindness hid expectation. "Long ride," he said simply. They climbed into the wagon, and he guided the horses forward. The town slowly disappeared behind them, replaced by open land and distant hills. For a long time, neither spoke. She studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to understand the man who had changed her life with a single bid. His face remained calm, focused on the road ahead. The silence felt heavy, but not threatening. After several miles, he finally spoke again. "You don't owe me anything today," he said quietly. She turned toward him confused.
"We'll talk when you're ready," he added. The words settled inside her like a small light.
She did not fully trust them yet, but they felt different from everything she had heard before. As the wagon moved farther from town, she realized that whatever waited ahead would not be the same as the life she had known. Fear and hope walked beside her equally, neither strong enough to replace the other. Behind them, the auction faded into memory, but its echo remained, the sound of a hammer falling marking the moment when everything changed, even if she did not yet understand how. The road stretched far ahead, quiet and empty, except for the slow rhythm of the wagon wheels turning over dry earth. The young woman sat carefully, keeping a small distance between herself and the rancher. The space felt important, like an invisible boundary she was not ready to cross. The wind moved gently through the open land, carrying the smell of grass and distant trees. She had traveled roads like this before, but never with such uncertainty about where she was going or what waited at the end. The rancher focused on guiding the horses. He did not ask questions or try to start unnecessary conversation. For her, the silence felt strange. Most people either demanded answers or filled quiet moments with meaningless talk. His calm presence felt different, almost respectful. After a long while, he slowed the wagon near a small stream. The horses lowered their heads to drink. He stepped down and offered his hand to help her, but he did not insist when she chose to climb down on her own. He unpacked simple food, bread, dried fruit, and water, placing it between them without comment. She hesitated before eating, unsure if accepting meant agreement to something unspoken. "You can rest," he said gently. "We still have some distance to go." His tone held no pressure. Slowly, she took a piece of bread, realizing how hungry she had been. They ate quietly, watching the water move across smooth stones. She studied him more closely now. His movements were careful and steady. There was no sign of impatience or pride, only a quiet focus that made her curious. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you bid?" The question came out softer than she expected, almost carried away by the wind. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the horizon, thinking carefully before speaking. "Because someone needed to," he said. The answer felt incomplete, but she sensed he was not hiding anything, simply choosing his words with care. Many questions filled her mind, but she did not ask more. For now, the simple honesty felt enough. They returned to the wagon, continuing their journey. As the sun lowered, the land changed. Hills rose slowly, and scattered trees appeared, offering shade along the path. When the ranch finally came into view, she felt both relief and tension. It was smaller than she expected, a modest house surrounded by fences, a barn, and wide-open fields where animals grazed peacefully. Nothing about it suggested wealth or power. Instead, it felt calm, almost forgotten by the world.
He stopped the wagon near the house and climbed down.
"This is it," he said simply. She followed slowly, taking in every detail. The air felt different here, quieter, safer, yet unfamiliar. He showed her a small room inside the house. The bed was simple but clean. A window looked out toward the hills, allowing warm light to enter.
"You can use this," he said. "Take your time settling in. Again, no demands."
No instructions beyond the basics. She stood in the doorway long after he left, trying to understand what was expected of her. A lack of clear rules made her uneasy. For so long her life had been controlled by agreements and obligations. Freedom, or something close to it, felt harder to understand than restriction. Later, she found him outside repairing a fence. The sound of tools hitting wood created a steady rhythm. She watched from a distance before slowly stepping closer. "Is there work?" she asked. "There's always work," he replied with a small smile.
"But you don't have to start today. I want to," she said quickly.
He nodded, handing her simple tools and showing her how to secure the fence properly. He explained patiently, never raising his voice or showing frustration when she made mistakes. As they worked side by side, she noticed how naturally he moved through the space, as if everything around him held meaning. Other workers passed by occasionally, greeting him with quiet respect. They glanced at her with curiosity but said nothing unkind. She felt the tension in her chest slowly ease. Days passed in similar rhythm. Mornings began early with chores. Afternoons brought long stretches of work under the sun. Evenings were quiet, often spent repairing tools or preparing simple meals. Still, she waited for the moment when his true expectations would appear. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sky change color, she gathered enough courage to ask again, "What do you expect from me?" He considered her words carefully.
"Honesty," he said at last, "and that you take care of yourself."
The answer confused her.
"That's all?" she asked. "For now," he said gently.
She struggled to accept it. Nothing in her past had been this simple. Over time, small details began to change how she felt. He always knocked before entering her space. He asked rather than ordered. He listened when she spoke, even when her words were uncertain. One morning she overheard two townspeople visiting the ranch. Their voices carried across the yard. "She belongs to you now?" one asked. The rancher's response came calmly. "No one belongs to me." The words struck her deeply. She had expected him to speak differently, to claim authority in some way. Instead, he rejected the idea entirely. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to understand his intentions. Memories of her past returned, moments when kindness had hidden control. She feared trusting too easily. Yet each day offered new proof that he meant what he said. One afternoon, he handed her a small notebook.
"For your plans," he explained.
"My plans?" she asked. "Whatever you want to learn or build," he said. "This place has room for new ideas." No one had ever asked her to imagine a future before. Slowly, she began writing. Small goals, skills she wanted to learn, places she might visit someday. Each word felt like a step toward something unknown, but hopeful. As weeks passed, the fear inside her softened. She laughed once while working, surprising herself with the sound. The ranch felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a place where she could breathe. Still, she remained cautious. Freedom, she realized, was not only about being released from control. It was about learning to trust that choices were truly hers. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the rancher spoke quietly. "When you feel ready," he said, "we should talk about the agreement." The moment she had expected finally arrived, but instead of fear, she felt something else, curiosity. because for the first time since the auction she believed that whatever he said next might not be about ownership or obligation. It might be about something entirely different. The evening air felt cooler than usual as they sat outside the ranch house. The sky slowly turned from gold to deep blue, and the sound of distant animals settling for the night filled the quiet space. The young woman sat on the wooden steps, her hands resting on her knees, waiting for the conversation he had mentioned earlier. She had thought about it all day. Every possible outcome had passed through her mind. Perhaps he would finally explain the rules she had been expecting since the day of the auction. Maybe there would be conditions she had not yet seen, responsibilities that would bind her more tightly to this place. The rancher joined her with 2 cups of warm tea. He handed one to her carefully before sitting a small distance away, leaving enough space for her to feel comfortable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded set of papers. He placed them gently on the step between them. "These are the legal documents from the auction," he said quietly. Her body tensed. She stared at the papers without touching them. "I wanted to wait until you felt settled before we talked about this," he continued. She swallowed slowly. "What happens now?" He took a deep breath before answering. "Nothing changes unless you want it to." The words confused her again. She picked up the papers carefully, unfolding them with cautious hands. The writing looked official, filled with language she did not fully understand. But one section had been marked clearly. He pointed toward it. "I signed a release," he explained. "You are not bound to any obligation here. You can stay, leave, work, or rest. Your choice." She stared at him, unable to speak. Freedom had always sounded simple when people talked about it. But now, facing it directly, she felt unsure how to react. Part of her had expected relief. Instead, she felt fear mixed with disbelief. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked toward the horizon before answering. "Because you deserve a chance to decide your own life." The words settled into her heart, slowly. She had spent so long being moved by circumstances beyond her control that the idea of true choice felt overwhelming. She folded the papers carefully and placed them back on the step. For a long time she said nothing. The night grew darker, and the stars began to appear. "I don't understand," she admitted softly. "That's all right," he said. "You don't have to understand everything today." In the days that followed, something inside her shifted. The knowledge that she was free changed how she saw every moment. Work felt different now. Not something she had to do, but something she chose. She woke earlier than before, helping with tasks without being asked. She noticed details she had missed before. How the animals responded to gentle handling. How the wind changed direction before storms. How the rancher quietly repaired things before they broke completely. Their conversations grew longer, though still simple. He asked about her interests, her thoughts, her memories. No one had ever listened to her in this way before. One afternoon, a group of townspeople arrived at the ranch to discuss supplies. Their eyes lingered on her, curiosity clear.
"She working for you?"
one man asked a rancher. "She works with me," he replied calmly. The difference in words felt important to her. Later she found herself thinking about the past less often. The heavy weight she carried began to lighten. Yet freedom also brought new questions. If she was not obligated to stay, why did she remain? The answer came slowly through small moments. Shared laughter during work, quiet evenings watching the sunset, the growing feeling that this place allowed her to become someone new. One day, while organizing tools in the barn, she found herself smiling without reason. The realization surprised her. Happiness felt unfamiliar, almost fragile. She walked outside and found the rancher repairing a gate. "I was thinking," she said hesitantly. He looked up, waiting patiently.
"What if I leave?" she asked.
He nodded thoughtfully. "Then I hope you find what you're looking for." The calm acceptance in his voice made her chest tighten. She had expected resistance, perhaps even disappointment. Instead, he offered only support. "And if I stay," she continued, Then we keep building this place together, he said simply. The words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. That night she sat by the window in her room, staring at the moonlight across the hills. She thought about the town, about the life she had lost, and about the future she could choose. For the first time she realized that freedom was not just about being released from something. It was about deciding where her heart wanted to belong. Days passed, and her confidence grew. She began suggesting improvements for the ranch, new ways to organize supplies, small changes that made work easier. The rancher listened carefully, often encouraging her ideas. One morning he handed her a set of keys. "You should have these," he said. She held them carefully, feeling their weight. They were simple metal keys, yet they felt like a symbol of trust. "You trust me?" she asked. "I trust your choices," he replied. The word stayed with her throughout the day. Later that week he told her they would need to visit town soon. Supplies were running low, and he needed to meet with traders. The thought of returning to town made her nervous. She remembered the whispers, the judgment, the way people had looked at her during the auction. But this time felt different. When they arrived, she walked beside him instead of behind. Some people stared, but others nodded politely. The change in their behavior surprised her. She realized that the difference was not only in how they saw her, it was in how she carried herself. On the way back to the ranch, she felt lighter. Freedom, she understood now, was not a single moment. It was a process, a slow rebuilding of trust in herself and the world around her. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, she looked at the ranch and felt something new, belonging. And yet, a quiet question remained inside her. Now that she was truly free, what would she choose next? The answer had not yet come, but she sensed it was close, waiting just beyond the horizon, ready to change everything once again. The days at the ranch had grown longer, warmer, and calmer. The young woman moved among the animals and tools with a confidence she had never known before. Each morning she rose before the sun, her feet brushing the cool earth as she prepared for the day. She no longer felt the heaviness of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Instead, there was space to breathe, to think, and to act for herself. She noticed small changes in herself. Her laughter came more easily, slipping from her lips while she worked in the fields. Her steps were lighter, not hurried with fear or uncertainty, but guided by a quiet sense of choice. Even the way she held herself had shifted, upright and steady, as if her back carried not only her own weight, but also the promise of her future. The rancher watched her from a distance at first, repairing fences or tending to the animals. He spoke little, but the calm steadiness of his presence reminded her she was not alone. He never asked for her loyalty, never demanded obedience. His trust was patient, gentle, and unwavering, and it taught her a lesson she had not known she needed. Freedom was not given only once. It was proven in every moment, in every small act of choice, in every quiet gesture that said, "I respect you." One afternoon, as the sun dropped lower in the sky, he approached her with a small wooden box in his hands. She looked up curiously as he knelt to place it on a flat stone nearby. The box was old, worn smooth from handling, but it felt important in a way that no amount of money could have made it. "I thought you might want this," he said softly. "It's yours if you want it." She hesitated, unsure what was inside. Part of her expected instructions or rules hidden within. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside were tools and small notebooks, things she could use to work and learn. But there was also space for her own things, empty and waiting, as if to remind her that she could shape what belonged to her. Her eyes met his. "Why do you trust me so much?" she asked. He shrugged, not with indifference but with quiet honesty. "Because you are capable. Because you have the right to decide for yourself." Her chest tightened with emotion she could barely name. She had been used to people deciding her life for her, controlling her through fear or obligation. Never before had someone handed her choice so fully, so openly. She realized then that this was what real freedom felt like. Not only being released from the past, but also being trusted to shape the future. As the weeks passed, the rancher suggested a trip to town to handle supplies and meet traders. She had feared returning once after the auction, but now the thought stirred only curiosity. She wanted to see the town not because she had to, but because she could. She wanted to witness the world outside the ranch, aware that she could leave at any time and that staying would be her own decision. When they arrived, she walked beside him. The streets were familiar but no longer oppressive. People whispered, stared, and some even nodded politely. She noticed the difference immediately, not only in how they looked at her, but in how she walked, confident and free. No one could claim her. No one could dictate her path. During their time in town, she saw reminders of her past, places of struggle, people who had turned away when she needed help. But now, those reminders did not weigh as heavily. She could remember without fear, recognize the difficulties, and move forward without letting them define her. Back at the ranch, the young woman began to plan. She organized her own small projects, tending to areas of the property that had been neglected, learning new skills from the rancher, and teaching herself to manage tasks independently. Each decision she made reminded her of the power she now held. She could act, choose, and grow without fear of being forced into something she did not want. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in deep shades of pink and orange, she sat beside the rancher once more. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and full of understanding. "I've been thinking about leaving," she said quietly, surprising herself with her honesty. The rancher nodded without judgment. "You're free to go," he said. "Whatever you choose is fine." "I know," she replied, "but I don't feel like I want to leave anymore. Not because I have to stay, but because I want to." His eyes softened. "That is the only reason worth staying." The words sank into her heart. She understood then that her freedom was not about leaving or staying. It was about making the choice herself, knowing she had complete control over her life. Staying at the ranch was no longer about obligation. It was about belonging, connection, and respect. In the following days, she grew more confident in her independence. She began taking small steps to contribute to the ranch in meaningful ways. She planted gardens, repaired fences without instruction, and suggested improvements for the animals' care. The rancher listened, encouraged, and guided without ever taking control from her. Their work together created an unspoken bond, built on trust, respect, and mutual support. Neither needed to speak of ownership or obligation, because there was none. Their connection thrived in the freedom that allowed each to act as themselves. One afternoon, a young neighbor from town visited, seeking advice on caring for livestock. The woman led the neighbor to the appropriate barn, showing her techniques and offering guidance she had learned from the rancher. She realized then that she could use her experiences to help others, not because she was required to, but because she chose to. This realization made her feel strong and capable in a way she had never imagined. She was no longer a person defined by circumstance. She was a person defined by choice, trust, and her own actions. As the sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the fields, she and the rancher paused to admire the quiet beauty of the ranch. The air smelled of earth, grass, and the gentle warmth of the closing day. They sat together side by side but without expectation, simply sharing the calm of the moment. For the first time, she felt completely unburdened. The auction, the whispers, the past struggles, all of it had shaped her. But it no longer defined her. She understood now that freedom was not given through transactions, words, or documents. It was lived, chosen, and respected every day. The rancher turned slightly toward her. "You know," he said softly, "freedom isn't always easy to carry. It comes with responsibility for yourself and for your choices." She understood responsibility now in a way she hadn't before. Responsibility was not control over someone else, but care for one's own life and respect for the choices of others. The young woman looked around the ranch, the animals grazing quietly, the fences standing firm, the land stretching toward the horizon. She realized she was not just free in theory, she was free in practice. She could shape her day, her work, and her future. She could act, decide, and belong. And she chose to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That night, under a sky full of stars, she finally allowed herself to feel peace. She had been given an opportunity, yes, but the true gift was hers to claim, the freedom to live her life with choice, dignity, and hope. And in that moment she understood something more. Freedom was never only about leaving the past behind. It was about deciding how to move forward, and that choice could not be taken from her. The ranch was quiet in the early morning, with mist rising slowly from the fields and the soft sound of animals stirring. The young woman stepped outside, stretching her arms and feeling the cool air on her skin. She had learned to wake early, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. The world felt larger now, filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The rancher was already in the fields, checking fences and tending to the animals. He glanced up and offered a small smile. She returned it, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with sunlight. It was the comfort of shared trust, built over weeks of work, silence, and conversation. She walked toward him, her steps steady. There was no hesitation now, no fear of the unknown. Each choice she had made had led her to this place, and she carried the knowledge that she could choose her path at any moment. She realized that her freedom had taught her strength, independence, and patience. As they worked together, she began to think about others who might need help. She had been in a position of vulnerability herself, and she remembered the helplessness of not knowing where to turn. Now she had skills, knowledge, and confidence, and she wanted to use them to support someone else. One afternoon, a young girl from a nearby farm arrived at the ranch. She was quiet, hesitant, and unsure of herself, much like the young woman had been when she first came here. The woman led her inside, offering food and a place to rest. She showed the girl how to care for the animals, how to move with purpose, and how to find confidence in small accomplishments. The girl listened, watching closely, and slowly began to smile. The young woman realized that helping the girl was different from anything she had experienced before. It was not about ownership or control. It was about guidance, respect, and encouragement. And in giving support freely, she felt a joy that was deeper than anything she had known. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch grew more vibrant under their care. Fields were cleared, fences repaired, animals tended with attention, and small improvements made life easier for everyone. The rancher observed quietly, guiding only when necessary, allowing the young woman to take the lead in her areas of expertise. He offered suggestions, shared his experience, and encouraged her to try new methods, but never demanded obedience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the young woman sat beside the rancher on the porch. She felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The world was no longer a place to fear, and her past no longer defined her. She had been given freedom, and she had learned how to live it fully. "I think I understand now," she said softly. "Understand what?" he asked. "What freedom really means," she replied. "It's not just about leaving the past behind. It's about making choices, about trusting yourself, about knowing that you can shape your life in a way that feels right to you." The rancher nodded. "Yes. That is the most important lesson of all." She looked at him, feeling gratitude that went beyond words. She had expected him to be an authority, someone who would control her life even after the auction. Instead, he had given her trust, respect, and the space to grow. She realized that true freedom required both courage and guidance, and she had been given both in a way that allowed her to flourish. The next day, they returned to town to check on supplies and visit the local community. This time, the young woman walked confidently beside the rancher. People noticed the change in her posture, her eyes, the way she carried herself. She was no longer someone to pity or judge. She was someone who had reclaimed her life and was building it on her own terms. During the trip, a few townspeople approached them, asking about her story. She spoke simply, explaining her experience and the lessons she had learned. She spoke of choice, trust, and the importance of believing in oneself. The rancher listened quietly, proud but silent, allowing her voice to carry her own story. When they returned to the ranch, she felt a new sense of belonging. The ranch was more than a place to work or live. It had become a home, a place where freedom was nurtured, and where every choice mattered. She had been given an opportunity, but she had made it her own. Over time, she began to take on more responsibilities, not because she was required to, but because she wanted to. She planted gardens, improved animal shelters, and organized supplies. Each task she chose to complete strengthened her sense of independence and accomplishment. She felt pride not in what others expected of her, but in what she had created with her own hands and decisions. One morning as she watched the sunrise from the porch, the rancher joined her with a small notebook. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing it to her. She opened it carefully, finding space to write, plan, and reflect. It was a gift of trust, a reminder that her choices mattered, and that she could continue to shape her life however she wished. "You've grown so much," he said softly. "I hope you know that." "I do," she replied, "and I've learned that growth comes from freedom, from being trusted, and from trusting myself." The rancher smiled, a quiet expression that carried approval, respect, and pride. "Then you are ready," he said. "Ready for whatever comes next." Weeks later, she saw the young girl she had helped become stronger, more confident, and capable. Watching her reminded the woman of her own journey, of fear, uncertainty, and hesitation. She realized how far she had come, and how much power choice and trust could give a person. The rancher approached, noticing her reflection in the calm evening light.
"You've done more than I expected," he said.
"You've helped someone else discover what you found for yourself."
"I only did what I could," she replied. "But seeing her grow,
it feels like freedom multiplied." That night she lay in bed thinking of the journey from the auction to the ranch. She remembered the uncertainty, the fear, and the loneliness she had carried. Now she felt a quiet strength, a sense of belonging, and an understanding that true freedom was both a gift and a responsibility. Freedom meant having the power to choose, the courage to act, and the respect to honor others' choices. It meant learning from the past without being bound by it, and stepping forward into a future of one's own making. In the final weeks at the ranch, she continued to grow, learn, and help others. Her life had transformed completely, not because someone had paid for her at an auction, but because someone had believed in her ability to live freely, and because she had taken that freedom and made it her own. She understood now that freedom was not just leaving the past behind. It was about choosing to stay in places that nurtured growth, making decisions with confidence, and inspiring others to find their own path. The ranch had become a symbol of that freedom, a place where choice, trust, and respect lived side by side. As the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields and illuminating the quiet beauty of the ranch, she felt complete. She had come from fear, uncertainty, and loss, but she had found strength, independence, and hope. She had been given a chance at freedom, and she had used it to build a life worth living. She knew that whatever challenges might come in the future, she would face them with courage, trust in herself, and respect for others. The auction had marked a beginning, but it was the choices she had made afterward that defined her. The rancher stood quietly beside her, watching the horizon, and she realized something profound. Freedom, when truly given, was not something that could be measured, sold, or taken away. It was something that grew through trust, choice, and respect, and it could change not only one life, but many lives around it.